Well, thank you, everyone. It's really great to see you all back with us for our second chat about data centres and what they mean for growth areas. Welcome to everyone, and I would acknowledge that I'm coming to you today from the lands of the Boonwurrung people down in southeast Melbourne, and I would pay my respects to elders past and present. And a particular welcome today to Belinda Dennett, CEO of Datacentres Australia, and Tim Marshall, who's on the call too, also from Datacentres Australia, the peak body, the recently established peak body. And we will hear from Belinda in a little while, and then have a really good opportunity to ask, Australia's leading expert on this issue, really, the sorts of questions that are coming up, because we'd really love to use our work here as a group to find a way to sort of approach data centres perhaps a bit more with a bit more confidence and strategy, and know that we have an expert here to answer a lot of those questions. So as you know, we have held one webinar already where we just heard about some of these initial issues coming up around data centres. We know a number of our members across Australia have some established data centres, some have many applications coming in, and we wanted to really try and collate some of those issues that are coming up collectively. And so after today, we'll have more information, and we can collate perhaps an issues paper to distribute quite widely across the membership on the things that your teams and your councils can think about as applications come in. And some of the things that really came up were around, this is a fast-moving sector, and so some planning definitions have not caught up, and so that's a real challenge for councils. We talked a lot about the support at the Commonwealth government and state government levels for data centre attraction, but then that sort of lack of, or the misalignment sometimes but with other state level industrial development strategies. We talked about the impact on employment land, enabling infrastructure impact, environmental impact. I'm sure these are all things that Belinda hears constantly and talks about quite a lot. And so given that growth areas, because of their location and because of their availability of industrial zone land, are proving to be a very popular location for data centres, we think it's really important that we can develop this understanding. We are, as local government, the closest level of government to the community. We have rights and obligations in that sense, and we have an access to the community that industry possibly doesn't have. So we want to make sure that we're on the front foot as growth areas, that we don't sort of miss opportunities, or we don't go in blind to this new sector, which is really changing the way our economy operates nationally, the way we all operate. Probably right at this moment, we are using the resources of a data centre, and it's a big change and an exciting change coming to the way we all live our lives and do our jobs. So please think of any questions you have. There's always an opportunity to talk further offline. If you have specific in-depth issues, we can connect you with some of our members who have gone through the process and have a really strong and established data centre presence. That's the purpose of today. So without further ado, I will hand over to Belinda, and I think Tim's going to drive some slides for you. We'll have your sort of overview thoughts and explanations, and then we'll jump into some Q&A if that's okay. But welcome, and thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Bronwyn. Really appreciate the partnership on this and being able to speak to you all. You do play a really important role in everything you do, but certainly for our industry. So we're really grateful for this opportunity, I guess, to share a little bit more about what we do and what we care about. Some of the statistics that might be helpful. There is misinformation out there. There's a lot of sort of imported headlines from the US that we'd like to clarify what is different here in Australia, and certainly welcome your questions. There are no silly questions. This is an area that people haven't traditionally had a lot of understanding of, and that's okay. So do feel that this is a space you can ask any questions. I am my partner works for local government. I'm quite connected with the sorts of things you deal with, the pressures that you get from all different sides. So there is empathy here for what you do, and we would like to help you, I guess, be allies with us in what we think is just a fantastic opportunity for Australia. So perhaps I will get started with sort of my short presentation to put some facts on the table, and then really happy to take your questions. So as Bronwyn said, I'm Belinda Dennett. I'm the CEO of Datacentres Australia. We are the peak body for the data centre sector. We launched 6 months ago in November last year. In that time, we've become sort of the industry voice for the sector in our engagement with government, with media, and with the broader public. What I want to do is give you a picture of where Australia sits in the global data centre landscape, the scale of the opportunity, and the real constraints that will determine how much of it we capture. So let's start with what data centres actually do, because this really matters for how you think about so many of the debates that are currently going on. Data centres underpin everything. Critical services like emergency response, air traffic control, national security, the everyday digital services we all use, banking, transport, streaming, email, business applications from basic operations to advanced analytics. And then there's artificial intelligence, and this is the game changer. AI represents a $142 billion opportunity per annum for Australia to transition its economy. It's a general purpose technology on an enormous trajectory, and it requires physical infrastructure to exist at scale. That infrastructure is data centres and AI factories. Slide. $680 billion, that's the global spend by hyperscale companies in 2026, just 4 companies. That's not a speculative bet, that's capital being deployed now at unprecedented scale. Countries that treat AI infrastructure as a future consideration will find themselves permanently behind. There is a global race. Capital is mobile. APAC, the APAC region, is projected to be the fastest growing region for data centre investment through to 2030, and Australia is competing directly with markets across the region. The question for Australia is not whether this investment is happening, it's whether we capture our share of it. So one thing I want to be really clear about is that Australia is not the US. So the US has 5,400 data centres and around 54 gigawatts of capacity. Australia has 186 operational data centres, or 252 if you count the pipeline, and 1.5 gigawatts of capacity. The scale is fundamentally different, and so is the regulatory framework. In Australia, data centres pay 100% of their connection costs and upstream augmentation under the national electricity rules. They are not subsidised by households, and that is a critical differentiator, and it matters for the political and regulatory risk profile. Australia's advantages are compelling. We're a Five Eyes security alliance. We have political stability. We have a strong rule of law. We have abundant renewable energy potential. We have the critical minerals trade deal, and we have world-class local operators in AirTrunk, NextDC, and CDC. The risk is not competition from cheaper APAC markets. For sovereign and hyperscale workloads with security requirements, Australia offers something these markets cannot. The real risk is speed. And if we can't deliver connections and approvals at globally competitive timeframes, the capital will go elsewhere. There's a lot of talk about pipelines and investment and projections. This is DC Byte, an independent global data analytics firm on the Sydney and Melbourne markets. You can see the breakdown across live capacity, under construction, committed, and early stage. It's important to understand that applications are not a forecasting tool. Not everything in these pipelines will be built. In fact, independent modelling by Oxford Economics shows that 6 out of 7 megawatts of connection applications are what we call phantom demand, duplicate applications for the same workload, speculative developers, and projects that won't secure energy or capital. The realistic picture, total national capacity is projected to grow from 1.4 megawatts to around 3.2 megawatts by 2030. Melbourne is tracking from 0.4 gigawatts to about 1.2. That's still more than doubling and represents a pipeline of around $26 billion. Sydney is the deeper market with around 60 operational data centres. Melbourne is growing faster and currently has a more competitive approvals process. Brisbane, Perth and Adelaide are emerging but are earlier in the trajectory. On AI demand, the facility design implications are real. Higher density racks, more sophisticated cooling, more power per rack. This is changing the physics of data center design. And if you, and we can talk about this if I'm speaking sort of too technically here, inference, so putting in the prompts for AI and getting the feedback is the growth area for data centers and AI development. But a lot of the conversation tends to focus on AI training, large language model training. That is not currently happening in Australia. That's what you're sort of importing from the US. And that's probably not where the future lies. It's really on that inferencing. Next slide, Tim. From an economic sense, data centers are high-value economic infrastructure. The tech sector delivers the highest gross value added of any industry. Data center developers also have contributed $3.1 billion to energy grid infrastructure since 2020, with $7.2 billion further forecast to 2030. 1.1 billion of that is infrastructure available for broader community use. And we've seen over the last 3 weeks AER decisions approving reductions in household power bills as a result of investing in that infrastructure, sharing the cost of that infrastructure across more customers and therefore putting downward pressure on household power bills. The other stat, our members offset 70% of energy use through renewables, 45% of all global power purchase agreements, long-term offtake agreements with renewable projects are signed with data centres. On water, water use is currently 0.04% of national consumption and 2.34% of the water used in manufacturing. And we're forecasting $1.1 billion of data centre investment in recycled water infrastructure to 2030. On the jobs front, people often focus on the jobs in a data centre. The construction, the electrical, the mechanical trades, the engineer jobs as well are real, and they're the jobs building the foundations of the AI era. Just a little bit about us, Data Centres Australia. Our advocacy is focused on 4 pillars that map directly to the constraints in this sector. Planning and development, we need globally competitive approval timeframes. Victoria is delivering. in around 4 months. And New South Wales has historically been sort of 12 months to 2 years, which is slow on global standards. Energy is the single biggest constraint. Accelerating grid connections and transmission investment is the priority. We've been closely engaged with governments at all levels. Sustainability, whether that's recycled water access, innovative cooling, transparent reporting, and our members are committed to this. And then on skills and workforce, we need to scale the construction and operational workforce, particularly in electrical and mechanical trades. To bring it together, Australia has a genuine window to capture a significant share of the global AI infrastructure. We have the attributes, we have world-class operators, we have an industry that is investing heavily in energy, water, and community infrastructure to support growth. So hopefully that gives you just a little bit of a framework, but really happy to take your questions and have a conversation on what would be most helpful to you.
Thank you so much, Belinda. It's certainly certainly an energizing sector to be part of. What I might do is, I see there's a good sort of starter question in the chat, and people have sent in some questions as well for when they registered. So I might just spend the first couple of minutes going through some of those questions and then open the floor. So the first question from Daniel Mack is about why does the phantom demand exist? And, we've all heard, from you just now about forecast demand and how do we know what's real and what we need to actually deliver.
Yeah, look, it is difficult, and it's the thing that we hear most often from governments, from utilities, from planners, from people in positions like yours. Like, how do we get a clearer picture on forecasting and trajectory? And I think that there's a few things going on here that it's important to understand. Firstly, probably the easier part to knock out is speculation. So under the rules that energy distributors need to abide by, anyone can apply for an energy connection, and there's not a high bar. I think it's $300 on a credit card type thing, and you can get an energy connection. Now, there are a lot of property developers out there that are reading the daily news about data centres. They're seeing the big figures. They're seeing that $680 billion of investment. So they are seeking an energy connection to sell a piece of land as a potential data centre site. I can tell you, will then ring me and tell me, have they got an offer for me? And I tell them I don't actually build data centers and I'm not in the market for a piece of land. But I am seeing this, so I know it's real. Most of those will never develop, they don't have finance. Now, to build a data center of scale, it's about $12 million per megawatt. If you think we're building 100, 200, 300 megawatt data centers now, that requires significant capital backing to do that. To get that sort of capital backing, you probably need to have had some experience in building a data center, know what you're doing. So a lot of those projects will just fall out of the system, but the distributors are stuck with having to give people an energy connection, and that's clogging up the system. Genuine providers can't get the energy they need when they actually are going to build a data center. The other thing that's happening that is harder to knock out is, if there's a customer, let's call it global tech company X, not X, but X, they will go to a number of data center operators and say, I'm looking for 100 megawatt capacity in the northwest of Melbourne. And all those people will go out, those companies will go out and look for a site, power, because they want to win that workload. They won't sign a contract with that customer until they've got land, power, water, and probably some degree of permitting in the system. One of them usually will win that contract, and then the others will fall out. So that's harder to knock out, and some of that is just competitive market forces, that they're not, everyone's trying to win this. The customer wants the best deal, so they're going to multiple players for competitive tension. So that one's difficult. And then the third one is just how quickly this space is moving. Whereas customers used to go to an operator and say, hey, I'm going to need capacity in 2029. What are you thinking? They're now saying, I need this by Q1 2027. So that the time frame of where the capacity demand is coming from is shorter. So operators are sort of having to go out ahead and start building to make sure they can win these contracts. So it is difficult. How do we sort that out? The first thing we really shone a light on this situation of phantom demand. There was some research commissioned by one of our members through Oxford Economics that just highlighted how significant this is. And then what we've done since we formed Datacentres Australia is formed a partnership with DC Byte to release every 6 months their data. Now they are one, very close to the sector, so they know who's genuine and who's not. They're tracking different sites. They know which customers are contracting with who, so they can sort of that criteria I took you through, early stage, committed, under construction. That's their methodology, if you like, and how they sort of weed out what's real and what's not. We've got a partnership with them, and we're going to be putting that data out publicly, freely available every 6 months to help others. One, we think there were so many reports out there from property developers, investment bankers that had an intention to hype it up, that it became quite unwieldy. So that's sort of our commitment, is to put that data out. It's on our website, datacentres.org.au, freely available. We put that one out at the start of end of April.
May, so in 6 months' time. And I've just put that in the chat.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I hope that helps.
And
we're working with AEMO as well. We share that data with them. Our figures are similar to 2030. Their figures beyond that, because the industry is moving so quickly, it's hard to be too predictable about what happens beyond that. I made some comments to the media yesterday that like a lot of that will be impacted by government policy decisions. Whether we say, yep, we want to go after this and we want to attract this, or we're going to put all these requirements on data centres which will curb the appetite and the investment. So it's hard to predict further out.
Yeah. And I suppose just going on from that then, as you said, there are some sort of frameworks, policy frameworks or guidelines, but from your perspective, how at state and Commonwealth level, how is that legislative framework development going? And, obviously we've had a look at across the states and they still seem to be quite high level a lot of the time, some high level thinking, but mostly saying, come to us, we're your, we'll do right by industry sort of thing. And where do you think that's headed in terms of legislation around standards or, regulation of locations and energy and all those sorts of things?
Yeah, look, I think we are very cautious on the need. We think Australia has a really robust regulatory framework already. So there are the national electricity rules that require data centre operators and large load operators to pay their way, pay for connections, pay augmentation. There's not a regulation, but data centre operators are doing it anyway, investing in renewable energy, bringing new renewable energy onto the grid. And that's actually working pretty well. We offset 70% of energy use. Now, those are agreements between customers and operators. In a data centre, 80% of the energy use is used by what we call the compute, so the chips and servers running the services, the applications inside a data center. That's owned and operated by the customer. And then you have sort of 20% of that energy use being used by the operator to provide the cooling, the lighting, the networking, and whatever else. Now, if you want to write rules about offsetting energy, you'd have to determine who that obligation falls on. Is that the operator or is it the customer? If you were to say it's the operator, because that's where all the focus is on the data center operator, I actually think you would break what is working pretty well at the moment. The hyperscalers, as we call them, the Microsofts, the Amazons, the Googles of the world, are really the anchor tenants in a data center. They sign long-term contracts with the operators, 10, 15 years or more. That enables them, in conjunction with the operator, to go and sign long-term big contracts with renewable energy. If you were talking about, and data center operators are different, so some will only build for hyperscalers, some will build for lots of little customers. Those customers tend to have much shorter duration contracts, and for much less amount of money. So would you then sign a renewable energy project for each customer, or would you try and cover the lot? And then you've got all these timing variabilities. So we are worried that if you start trying to write rules about that, you may actually break the system that is currently underwriting the renewable energy transition. There's talk about transparency and standards. Data centers do report energy emissions under the National Greenhouse Energy Reporting Scheme. They're required to. So NGAs, if you meet a certain threshold, that's available and was just recently released and is publicly available, what that emissions for Scope 1 and Scope 2 look like. A lot of our members have neighbours ratings. But in terms of the industry standard is around PUE, power usage efficiency, and water usage efficiency. These tend to be sort of industry standards. They're not always calculated the same way. There's a difference between what that looks like when you first build a data center as opposed to when it's operating at capacity. One of the challenges in our industry is
the chair outside.
You build data centers in phases, and sorry, we've got a very busy lunchroom out the back there. You build data centers in phases, and so a data center might be called a 300 megawatt capacity, but in the first year only 40 megawatts is operating. So the power usage efficiency is less efficient in those early stages because you've designed it to be operating at full capacity. So there's some challenges with providing unhelpful information without context if you use those existing industry standards. What we're doing is working with the Green Building Council of Australia to come up with a framework that is better suited to the data center industry. Now, that's going to take time. It's going to be working with a whole lot of different people in the supply chain, but we think that's going to give us a better framework that provides some transparency measures that are more helpful than what we think is currently available.
Thanks.
Sorry, that was a very long answer.
Yeah, no, but I think it's it's really interesting that which industries standards are applicable, and that in a fast-moving environment, it's still taking time, of course, to find a model for this new industry in a way. Yeah. So that will be really interesting to follow, and I think that by the scale of that, it sort of looks like renewable energy offsets, for example, are on a large scale and quite removed, and through a large partnership there. But I suppose there's interest around local offsets, and so we've had a question in the chat there about is local renewable energy procurement, but by the sounds of it, the scale is so big that it needs to be from a really large scale renewable energy provider. And then, this next question, I think that ties in again with the location and the place. And how can, from your members' point of view, how can local government sort of be part of those early conversations? And, I'd love to think that we could have members with large scale industrial land saying, here's the good location where the impact on residents and other local industries will be less than if it was, within an existing neighbourhood sort of thing. So what's, from your members' point of view, what's that? How can we offset, or how can we work with, developers around getting some strategy behind that, especially when all those, I shouldn't say, but half-baked state and Australian sort of frameworks that are very high level promise fast tracking.
Well, yeah, it's not that fast. Trust me. Look, I think there's a couple of things here. Let me just answer Daniel's question on matching or location matching of the renewable energy. The hyperscalers are really trying to do state matched locations. So if they've got data centers operating in Victoria, they're trying to find offsets with renewable projects in Victoria, similarly with New South Wales. There is somewhat of a shortage of viable renewable energy projects that meet the right time frame for a data center, that meet the right scale. So, they're certainly trying to do that state matching. It's not always possible. The other thing that we sort of point out is like say an Amazon, for example, who recently announced 9 renewable energy projects that they're committing to, taking their contribution to $2.8 billion in Australia renewable energy procurement. They try and cover their whole portfolio, so they're not doing site by site, and part of that is what I talked about, data centers built in phases. This much is operational, this is what that part looks like. So they're trying to offset their entire portfolio, including their partner data center operators, so they don't always just use their own built data centers. They may be a customer in a NextDC data center, for example. So they try to cover all that, not break that down. Now, people might think that's not transparent. That's just kind of the way they can get the best value, both for the renewable energy project and also for their workloads, that they're just covering everything off. And again, that's one of the things we think is at risk if you start trying to legislate this. Okay, well, we now want you to offset that particular site with a renewable energy project. Okay, well, it's now this big and it's not valuable to the energy project. So they're the risks we see. Coming back to location of data centers, again, part of the challenge here, and we've had governments at all levels saying, well, we would like to identify the sites we think are appropriate and tell you that's where we'd like you to build. Now, think of that from a highly competitive, all those speculators we talked about. What would happen is they would go and there would be a bidding war on that land that you've identified for a data center. It would skyrocket. The speculator would buy it and then try and sell it to someone else. So there actually needs to be, secrecy is not the right word, but most of our members have site selection teams that are working away quietly, looking at every bit of off-market land, available land, assessing it. So the due diligence, can I get energy connection here? Can I get a water connection? Does it have 2 fibre connections? Does it meet my size requirements? Is it in an availability zone? If I talk about that for a moment, where data centres predominantly are selected is by the customer. Customers will build, they call it N+1, so 2 or 3 data centers in a cluster that talk to each other. And they're 7 to 10 kilometres apart so that you've got really short latency. They're there for backup and redundancy. So generally a customer will draw a circle on a map and say, we're looking for capacity and this is where it needs to be. So it's the customer kind of dictating. This is why you see the western suburbs of Sydney, the northwest of Melbourne really being the hot spots, because that's where they put their what we call cloud infrastructure. So they do cluster around that. Now, what will change and is changing is AI factories, more standalone facilities that aren't running those critical services, that can be further out, that can be more standalone. And they may be sites where there's just a lot more flexibility in location. But I think you may still have the same problem. If you identified sites, if government identified sites or zones, all you can do is drive up that land price and have some sort of bidding war. So it is difficult. The thing that we would argue, and you may have different views on this, but certainly every data centre I go to, my question is, what was here before? And generally it's an abattoir, it's a ABC TV studio, it's was going to be the Westgate Freeway, or it was a factory of some description. So we believe data centers are, replacing its old industry, replacing new industry. Some of the headlines we've seen in the US around the gigawatt facilities being built on farmland, we don't believe that's happening here in Australia. There are rules around planning, and you would know them better than I do. So where I think the challenge is coming up in some locations is where, traditionally we treated rivers as dumping grounds, and so there is industrial land on river banks, and people now have a very different view of a river location, and it's still industrial zoned, and so there is this development happening, and people are claiming, well, that's inappropriate. We would say that's a decision for planning authorities to think about. The other place where we get friction is where industrial land zone butts up against residential land zone. And so we do have people living closer to data centres than clearly they would like. And that does cause some friction. And I think that's where there's opportunity for more engagement with council when that site has been selected, to work a bit more closely of, well, what does, how do we make the most of the fact that this is industrial land up against residential? How do we be mindful of what, whether it's setbacks or landscaping or other things that make it more comfortable for residents. What we tend to find is residents, it tends to be around the construction that is the problem, and we would argue, well, constructing anything would probably have the similar reaction. And there's also, I think, some of the concern comes from not demystifying what a data centre is. And because they are critical infrastructure, they're not sort of places you just wander into. Some of our members are fantastic at inviting the local communities in to do a tour, to understand what it's around. They have the, retirement homes and the schools, and the kids come through. And that's been really incredibly helpful to helping communities understand that this is actually pretty cool. It's the new future. It's running all that stuff that we love to use in our days. So they're the sorts of things that I would be saying if you've got data centres in your local space, if you as councillors haven't been asked for a tour, and we're certainly encouraging our members to do more with the community, to make it available.
I think that's a great idea, and I think we'll definitely be trying to do that.
Well, and let us know if we can help, because if they're our members, we will.
A lot of questions come through, and we've sort of touched on it around water and noise impact and other sort of amenity impact. So, have you seen good examples of? I mean, you've said, something, I think you had a stat earlier around water supply, but are the operators looking at, recycled water?
Yes.
All that's, what's the attitude of industry around water and noise, for example?
Yeah. So, look, the water thing, I gave you some stats there. The water use is actually quite minimal. There's been some really terrible misinformation put out there. It started in the US where a journalist, added a few zeros and got a number wrong, and it's never been able to be put back in. And we've had some Sydney Water figures out there that used what are, that pipeline of if every data centre was built, which would never happen, that you'd suddenly be using 25% of Sydney's water, which would also never happen. It would just never be allowed to happen. So that's sort of some of what we're up against. Now, just to give you that, data centres use water in their cooling systems because it is the physics of water, it's a far more efficient way to transfer heat. You are trying to get heat produced by the computers out of a data center to make sure they stay at a temperature which allows the computers to keep operating. There's a variety of different cooling systems that are used. The majority of the time in Australia, we're actually quite lucky that we can use air cooling, where the hot air is rejected out of the building, cool air is sucked in. Melbourne in particular, cools down at night most of the time. That's, I think AWS had a statistic that 95% of the time they use air cooling. When it gets hotter, evaporative cooling has been a thing. That's how people have reduced the energy cost or the energy use by using water in the cooling. And that would be used on those hot days where air cooling is not significant. Not enough to bring the temperature down. What we are seeing now, there's some operators used a closed loop system where the water just circulates, so it's not evaporating back to the environment. It's just circulating. Those systems are good, but they do use more energy. So there is this policy trade-off that you always have, energy versus water. What we're starting to see with AI and AI factories is what's called liquid-to-chip cooling, and it doesn't actually use water. It's a glycogen-type product that cools the chips directly rather than trying to cool the air around it. And I think we'll continue to see a lot of innovation in this space to the point where we are using far less water. A number of our members have been trying for many years to get access to recycled water. There have been some challenges just in our legislative framework that whilst there's nothing that stops the water authorities making water available for industrial use, there's nothing that specifically allows them to. So there's been this sort of standoff for a long time on that. What's now, some of our partners have done partnerships with private water operators to use recycled or non-potable water sources, building out that infrastructure. And we think there's, again, huge opportunity, not just for an industry solution, but for a greater community solution. The private company that I talk to says, hey, because we only need water on some times of parts of the year, most of the time we don't, we can give that water back to parks, to agriculture, to other community uses. We don't need it. So we would build that infrastructure. So they're the sorts of things that we're looking at. It's just been a bit of a challenge to get through some of those bureaucratic blockers that we've had.
Thanks. So I know that there's a couple of questions coming in, and I just wanted to make sure, we're hoping this is the start of conversations and sort of working together on understanding this sector. So there's, as Tess said, a huge loaded question, and that might be one that we need to sort of have a think about, almost as a piece of work, to be honest. That's, how do all the players interact? Where are the trade-offs? Where are the competing interests? And so I think we might need to sort of have a deeper think about that. And that's my way of, because we only have 14 minutes left, parking it. We might be able to come to it this time, but I also want to really talk about some of those other local benefits. So there's a question in the chat there around construction jobs, but how do operators then what are the benefits ongoing potential benefits for local community? We had a couple of questions come in on registration around that too, just around, adjacent skills development, involvement with the community ongoing. We talk about tours, but what's that? Have you seen examples of where there's a skills uplift locally, there's investment in education, there's investment in community? What have you seen?
Yeah. So I think there is a lot of that going on, but perhaps our members have not been very good at talking about it. And they're quite varied. So whether they're, and I think this is where engaging with the council and finding out what the council thinks would be useful, like a bit more of a two-way conversation. One of our facilities in Western Melbourne is in, industrial land, but it's actually quite close to the local council. One of the buildings, there's nothing around that area. The operator built a cafe that is open to the public, available. The council use it. They have meetings there. They use it for lunch. It's quite a great local facility in a place that hasn't had that sort of amenity, I guess. Other things around tree planting and landscaping and cleaning up footpaths and the likes are things that our members are always quite happy to do. We talk about the investment in energy infrastructure. So often it's the operator is paying for a new substation. That's bringing more energy. That's bringing more availability for public use. I think in part of Tessa's long question that I don't know if my brain can talk and read all of that at once, but you do talk about and I've just lost my train of thought. That was silly of me to talk. But anyway, the investment in the energy infrastructure that makes that available for more community use. How do you prioritize in terms of why are data centres good? Well, firstly, they actually are the highest gross value added. If you think about it in economic terms of any industry, higher than manufacturing, higher than mining. So there is this great return underpinning the ecosystem, if you like, creating more supply chain companies. So a lot of our companies will use local precast concrete manufacturers in the supply chain. I think there's more that can be done here, particularly in thinking about precinct planning, and Western Sydney is one that is really being quite proactive. The local councils and the local alliance group up there thinking about how we do a better job of that. In terms of skills delivery, a lot of our members are doing their own sort of little standalone projects. I'd love to think about how we bring that together as an industry and do greater scaled projects. But maybe this is something we can work on together, where we're getting input directly from you guys on, hey, what would be helpful? You know your communities better than we do, and we can take that to our members and say, this is the sort of thing that they want. The skills stuff, getting people ready for this AI transition, or understanding the jobs that are in our data centres. I met with an Indigenous plumbing community in Western Sydney who said, this is fantastic. My people used to have to drive all the way across to the other side of the Sydney to work. They're now in their own communities doing these jobs that are actually lasting for years because the scale of the construction is spread out. So there are jobs in both trades and skilled jobs. I think there's more we can do around precincts, and I think if you've got good ideas about what more could make this a better community aspect, we've had people build community facilities. Now, some of this is challenged by the security nature of the operations, but I think getting an idea of what would be helpful is certainly something we'd be happy to work with you and work with our members on.
That sounds fantastic. And I wonder, as a bit of a background to that, if you would have a think about any research that's been done or any other sort of international examples of where that precinct development has really taken off and had longer term benefits. And just around that, how long will the data center exist, and how quickly is technology evolving? That do they have a 10 or 20 or 100-year lifespan?
30 to 50 year.
30 to 50.
Yeah. So the insides, the equipment will turn over, but the facilities are sort of predicated on a 30 to 50 year lifespan.
Yeah.
I did want to touch on the noise thing with you just quickly. What I've seen, and I don't want to negate, I go to a lot of data centers. I don't notice the noise. Granted, I'm not sleeping next to it or living next to it. I know our members, a lot of them, the noise is either the cooling systems, or sometimes they're the diesel generators that are the backup that get tested periodically once a month to make sure that they're going to work. Now, what I've seen is our members put those generators inside very insulated shipping containers. They report to me they've never had a complaint about noise from generators. The one noise complaint they got was a gate that was left open and did that annoying beep, beep, beep thing all night. But we want to do some more testing on that. I think that's things we can look at. But the cooling is pretty critical part of a data center's operations, and I guess that's kind of why they are built in the industrial zones.
Yeah. So it just feels to me like there's a few things for us as an alliance and for councils individually to think about, and one of them is just the broader where this new industry fits in both an economic development strategy and strategic planning and industrial estate planning, because as legislation evolves, as regulation evolves, as state and federal frameworks become a little bit more clearer, we need to make sure we can be in there to have a presence and to be part of the decision, I suppose, rather than so much being made at that state level, and to think of it as obviously representing community. Where does this fit into council's longer term plans, but also needing to be pragmatic about this. And I think we can probably work on bringing together those examples of how we can think more strategically about this. And I know some of our members have a really strong presence of data center operators, so how can we use their experience too to inform each other? And then if we couldn't keep in touch, and any further research or other international examples that you've seen of these things working really well and having a long-term positive impact would be fantastic. A question to sort of wrap up, I suppose, before the one about can we have data centers in space, which apparently has been talked about. Why don't we sort of try and wrap up with that, because there's some other specific questions which we might just keep talking to you about and keep reporting back to members. But in terms of the big picture future, is space the answer, or are our growth areas the answer for our
Look, I think the thing I guess I would close with is there's different data centers, different types that need different requirements. So when you've got Elon Musk and Google and the like saying we want to put a data center in space, I'd probably back that it will happen. Now, that's not going to be right for all workloads and many workloads. I think what you're probably seeing in your communities is really cloud AI inferencing infrastructure, which is the critical digital services that run the critical needs of cities. That's why they're in your close to the urban fringe. That's why they need to be there. I don't think they're the sorts of workloads that will go to space anytime soon. Space has been talked about because of, you don't need cooling there. You have the sun to permanently provide solar energy. When one of the reasons we talk about being too far from the urban fringes, a problem is kind of getting equipment in and out and people coming and going. I don't know how we solve for that in space, but I'm sure there's smarter people than me that will figure that one out. There's a lot of things. I mean, a few years ago it was underwater data centers. That was the thing that was going to be, and then that didn't kind of work out. So I think there'll be lots of things that people will look at and experiment, and the physics says yes, but does the practicalities of make that viable? Maybe not. I strongly do not believe we are overbuilding data center infrastructure that we need today, and that's going to be short term. I do think we're going to see the value created by building the infrastructure, both here in Australia, but also in your communities, is going to pay dividends for future jobs, I mean, if you think of AI replacing knowledge workers' jobs, jobs building the infrastructure are not going to be replaced by AI. These are actually going to be the cool jobs of the future. I think there's a really awesome opportunity to attract that into your communities. Bronwyn, we spoke about the other day, like industrial land is just so important and is so often underrated as to the value it provides to our economies. So I think we need to tell that story more. The fact that we should build housing everywhere, to me, is just like the way you would live in a residential zone would be very different if there wasn't industrial zoned land supporting that. So I'll finish with that, but I will say we are very keen to work with you. Use us as, your input to any of those processes you feel you're not part of. We do want to hear your ideas and suggestions. We're a conduit to our members. Let's use this as a starting framework for more engagement, and hopefully we can work through some of these challenges together and find some solutions.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time. We are out of time for today. Tess has got lots of questions, so that's fantastic, Tess. I really appreciate it. So we'll keep working with you on those. Really appreciate your openness to this sort of conversation and questioning. It appears to me we have a bit of a window of opportunity to organise ourselves and our own thinking and our own sort of industry and economic strategies. There is a parliamentary inquiry just started, so, we'll be part of that, as I'm sure you will be. And yeah, would love to keep conversation going. So thank you so much. Really appreciate your presentation and as your insights, as Anne just said.
Well, thank you. We do appreciate the engagement, and just keep in touch and let us know. And Tess, happy to answer some of your questions. Shoot them through to me.
Wonderful. Thanks, everyone. We will be in touch with all of our members who've attended today and those who've missed it but have indicated they'd be here. So we'll come back to you with a summary and keep the conversation going. So thanks again, everyone.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank
you,
you.
Kim,
Bye-bye.
as well. Thanks, Belinda.
It's great. Thank you.
Thank you. See ya.